All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. I'm super excited for this podcast today. Me and the guest have actually spent about 45 minutes having a podcast before I turned the cameras on. But right before we get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you want to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, let's introduce Emma Roberts. Emma, for the people that don't know you and maybe haven't seen one of my episodes, we're going to start this one like I did my favorite episodes. We're going to take it all the way back. I want to know where you were born and raised, what you were like as a young woman, what your family unit was like really try to paint the picture of who you were that has built you into the woman that you are today.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on. Grew up in Brighton, so locally here. Moved here when I was 2, so pretty much here my whole life. I'd say pretty average childhood, or like a little above average, just middle class, especially growing up in Brighton, a little average compared to how a lot of people grow up. I have 2 older sisters, and then my parents. My dad was a firefighter, just recently retired. So, childhood, majority of the time, my mom was stay-at-home mom. Once we got a little bit older, she worked with the schools. That way she could have the same time off as we did. She was a lunch lady first, and then did parapro work, so she worked with special needs kids. My dad was probably instilled the most in me. I didn't realize it until I got older. But being younger and being the youngest kid, I was a pretty angry child. I don't know why. I think it maybe had to do with like attention. My sisters are only 14 months apart, and I'm 3 and 4 years apart from them. So I think that was something too. I didn't really, they always hung out. I was the lame little sister. My mom would, try to give me attention, but she was also trying to run a household and, support my dad and my sisters. So I was never really involved in sports or anything. I mean, I did soccer as a kid, like Selkra, everybody does. Did Girl Scouts, but definitely struggled as a kid with having friends. Didn't really have a whole lot of friends. I think my anger probably had to do with that. And I've always been a very outspoken person, but I think as a kid, I didn't really control it or know when not to say something. And especially being a girl, I think that did not help me at all.
So one thing I got to ask right away, not to interrupt you, but you were the youngest of your siblings. I actually would have never guessed that. Based on the character traits that I know you to have, I expected you to be the oldest. I expected, because you really have a lot of leadership and think for yourself, and you're very critical of yourself, and you have like a perfectionist aspect to you. And these are just the things on the surface that I've noticed. That, to me, traditionally, a lot of the times comes from being the eldest child and having to kind of fend for yourself, and your parents came down on you the hardest. And the youngest child tends to get like the most babying and like excessive love and delusion and like all these other aspects. Go into a little bit more why the family dynamic wasn't like that, or how in the world, you are the way that you are, having been the baby. I would have never guessed that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not the first person to have told me that. Same thing with just my age in general. Between me being the youngest and my age, everybody first is like, no way you aren't the oldest, and no way you're the age that you are. I definitely had it easier than my sisters, I'd say. My parents never grounded me. My sisters got grounded, but I challenged everything. I was like, oh, my way or the highway. You want to try to ground me? Let's see how that goes. Like, I gave them a hard time. And with my dad always working so much, my mom had a really hard time controlling me because she was very passive. And me and my dad are 2 peas in a pod in a lot of ways. And then we also differ in a lot. So with him, he worked 12-hour shifts. Wasn't 24 hours as some typical fire departments are. But 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And like most of my childhood, because holidays was triple pay, so we didn't do anything for Christmas or Thanksgiving because he would work. so I couldn't like open gifts until 6 p.m. or something. But yeah, I think I just challenged them a lot more than my sisters did. But I would say things were a little bit easier on me. And then I think just what I went through, like mentally, forced me to grow up quicker than they did, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to talk about that because I cannot put my finger on exactly why you are who you are yet, or I'm trying to look with a magnifying glass into your story and figure out like, okay, where did the pieces sync up that create this girl? Because if you have a mom that is more passive and you're getting away with more and you have the capability of growing into a little tyrant. Like, especially if you're high in disagreeableness and you're like kind of my way or the highway and nobody is putting you in check, the fact that you're not just a literal tyrant right now that people don't want to be around, something had to happen along the way. Some type of internal work, some type of setback, some type of realization of morality or the standards that you wanted to live by. Do you remember any certain moments that really rocked you, or can you put any finger on like your formula right now does not add up? I'm a I love math, I love logic, I love things like that. Right now there's no correlation to me. Can you give me any explanation as to how the youngest child that's not being given probably the right structure and tough love necessary to really promote the best out of most people, how did you end up where you are today?
Yeah, well, definitely I think my parents and my sisters would say I was a tyrant when I was really young. I definitely challenged what my parents had normally seen or previously seen with my sisters, but I think it wasn't until I got put into therapy that I started changing my point of view.
Why were you put into therapy? Let's start with that.
So I think it started in 8th grade. Depression's always ran in my family. My middle sister's the only one that I'd say now I see that she has dealt with it too, but just like in a different way. But both my parents and my oldest sister dealt with it. All of us were on medication at one point.
Do you have a source? Like, what's the family source of the depression?
I don't know. Both of my parents' had it too. I mean, my mom's parents were in work camps in World War II and came over here after the war ended. And so in their household, depression wasn't a thing. It didn't exist.
Now, think about that statement. Everyone that watches these episodes, people that went through the most extreme hardships imaginable, the worst periods that you could imagine, right? Depression didn't exist for them. There's a key in that. There's some gold in that concept, and you'd have to really dig into it. But a lot of the times you turn lead into gold. You turn the worst experiences into the best people, right? So for the rest of the family, the source, though, is it not living a life that fully speaks to their spirit? Is it not having a voice in the world like they should? I mean, and maybe you don't know, but it's like I love the depth of things.
Yeah, I definitely think that probably has something to do with it, which I wouldn't have been able to put my finger on until now, the not living the life that they could be living. I mean, my dad busted his ass to give us what we were given, and my mom as well to support and, do whatever she could to help out. But it wasn't until I got older that I started to see my dad was just working. He didn't have a life outside of work. And that is, don't get me wrong, I got my very intense work ethic from him, but having a hobby, having some sort of source of happiness, he never had anything like that. And I think that might be where it comes from. For my mom, I'm not really sure because she's very open compared to my dad. Like, if anything, I feel like looks up to me a lot now in my older age, where I think my dad, as much as I'll still try to be combative with him and his mindset, he's very stubborn, like I am. But yeah, therapy, they could just tell that I was mentally not doing well. And my mom my oldest sister got into therapy. I think my parents did it on and off. My dad, not that much, because to him, nobody can tell him something he doesn't already know. But I got into therapy, and even from a very young age, I never wanted to be put on medication. because I've always had the mindset of it. It's not like a heart disease or diabetes or something. And I know that's kind of a hard statement to make because some people say, yeah, it's literally a chemical
Well, for
imbalance
some
in your
people,
brain.
it could be maybe a neurochemistry issue. But a lot of the times, I feel like if we were able to self actuate you and give you a life where you were fully empowered and your spirit was radiating and you had a beautiful community and you had family and you were surrounded by loved ones and you felt like you were enough in the world and you took your power back in every way that it was stripped from you, would the depression exist then?
Oh, yeah.
Because if the answer is no, then that doesn't mean that medication is necessarily the answer.
No, and I completely agree with that. And I feel like that's also why most of my childhood and even now, I don't really like to bring up like, oh, I struggle with depression. I had this because it became way too much of a crutch for a lot of people. Like I remember growing up and people would post Facebook statuses like, I want to commit suicide. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like I've been there and I felt that, but I didn't make a Facebook. If anything, nobody knew. But yeah, so I got put into therapy. That's mostly thanks to my mom, I'd say. Like, obviously, I think my dad agreed to it, but my mom was the one that pushed and probably took me to 5 different people that I would see once. And I'm like, I don't like them. And then she was like, all right, well, I guess I'll find somebody else, and would drag me along because I couldn't drive. Would drag me along, take me one place to another. So she finally took me somewhere that I kind of liked. Looking back, she didn't do a whole lot for me, but I felt comfortable enough to at least open up. And she thought I needed to be on medication. And she, whatever the term is, she didn't have the ability to prescribe medication, so she referred me to see somebody else. My mom started taking me to see this guy. He did put me on medication, and it was probably like a very unhealthy situation, which again, it took both of us a minute to see, her especially. Because again, she's just trying to do whatever she can to help her daughter, which I give her so much credit for because I was a pain in the ass. Put me on antidepressants and Adderall because I never paid attention in school most of the time. I mean, I did what I had to do in middle school, but once high school hit, I just did not care at all. I was like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to, none of this is interesting. I wasn't really involved in much. I mean, I played lacrosse my freshman and sophomore year just because I had a friend that did it, but I wasn't that great. I just kind of did it to do it. But so he started putting me on medication, but he would do, especially with the antidepressants, like I think I saw him every 2 weeks, and every 2 weeks he would either change the dosage or change the medication. Like I felt, looking back, I was like a guinea pig. Like he was like, okay, I'll start you on like take half a pill of this, and then after 3 days, take a whole pill and whatever. So anyway, that goes on for.
Jesus Christ. I got to interrupt for just a second. The idea of experimenting on people with different medication, being like, oh, which one of these combinations will figure out this problem? That is fucking terrifying. Listen, you can dig into someone's life and try to learn them and try to solve their problems at the deepest levels. And like, it's going to be a process. It is incredibly hard to help someone fix their psyche, to turn their life around, to get them to face dark fears or inadequacies or shortcomings and make their life better. Those are difficult things. And you might want to just feel like you're serving your patients to the best. And I'm sure in his brain, it's like the way I serve her best is I just give her whatever chemicals she needs to just be right. You're not going to be right until you're proud of your place in the world, until you're proud of the person that you are, until you work through the inner world where you don't want to look. It is horrifying to think the amount of people out in the world right now, and it's going to get worse. We're now all of a sudden, you can like, it looks like there's going to be virtual doctors. You can just grab an app. I don't like this person. Swipe, swipe, swipe. It's going to be like a Tinder for doctors. Oh, this person looks like I want them to look. They tell me what I want to hear, and they load me up with prescription drugs. That is catastrophic to human potential. That is catastrophic to society. That is catastrophic to people in general. The reason being is those people then will raise children. And the second they have a kid that's depressed, that's what they're going to do. They're going to go, let's load you up on these drugs. It's working great for me, while your life is still a fraction of what it should be if you did the inner work. So I didn't want to cut you off on that, but like, that's terrifying. And it sounds like deep within your mind, you always knew that like, maybe this isn't the right option, because so many people that are depressed, that are struggling, they don't know. And they're so desperately just seeking help, and they just want someone to love them and care about them and fix them, that they're willing to take whatever you put in a shiny box and you say, like, here's your cure. That, it's like, as hard as it is to hear if you're a person, that's depressed that listens to this episode, the power is probably within you.
Yeah, and the most fucked up part of it all, so because my mom wasn't really seeing a lot of progression, if anything, Adderall was doing the reverse to me. So, like, my friend pretty much my only friend throughout high school, we played lacrosse together, I would go hang out at her house and I would take a nap. Like, I wouldn't eat. It affected my appetite, but I was sleeping all the time. It was not stimulating me. So finally, my mom was like, I want to have a meeting with you and talk about your plan of what you want to do, medication-wise with my daughter, because it's not seeming... And my mom's the sweetest person in the world, but she's not... Like, me and my dad think very similar. Sometimes she's just too trusting. That's a good way to put it.
She's non-confrontational, right?
Yeah.
She wants to just believe that people have the best interest. She wants to just go with the flow. I understand, without even meeting her.
Yeah, that's what you do for a living, so I'm trusting that you're going to do the right thing. She has this meeting with him, and in order to make her feel better when she's saying, this medication, all this, he says, well, I have my 4-year-old on anti-anxiety medication. So, like, that's how he's justifying the fact that I'm on this medication. And I think I was waiting in the car when she had this meeting, because it might have been like after my session, and she just came out like bawling. Like, she was so, like, she felt like it was her fault. She ruined and like put me into this situation. And I think at the time I was kind of just like, I mean, whatever, like, let's just not see him anymore. And she was sitting there like, I can't believe I let this go on as long as
Well, that's madness. I mean, can you see now? Imagine if someone said that to you. You'd be like, you're a lunatic. You should have your license removed. You're giving anxiety medication to a 4-year-old?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. And you know what? The thing is, that's not an isolated case, Emma. Across this country, you have people in positions of authority that, based on their psychological state and their understanding, they're going to prescribe treatment. And that is terrifying.
Yep.
100%.
Yeah, so I stopped going to him, and it took, I don't know how we found this lady. Her name's Patty. Best person I have ever come across, impacted my life in so many ways. My mom found her somehow, and I started seeing her, and I was 16 when I started seeing her, and I saw her on and off until the last day I saw her was the day I came to this gym to see what it was about and everything. And it wasn't consistent. There would be times I'd go months without seeing her, especially because there was issues with insurance and stuff like that. But she was always, and it even became, when I first started seeing her, she was traditional therapist or whatever you want to call her. And then down the line, she became like she was in charge of all the therapists. So she never saw patients except for me and like one other person. She always presented it, because there was a moment when I was on medication when I was seeing her and I had to go see somebody else to just get prescribed it, but she always presented it as it's not permanent. Depending on where you are in your life, and if you physically are not able to get up and get out of bed to figure out what you need to do to work on how you're feeling, you can take this medication for a temporary period of time until you're in a better mindset, and then you can get off of it. And so when she presented it that way to me, I'm like, okay, this makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about, trying it out in that situation, especially with my previous.
Well, that just seems like a rational person. Yeah, if you can't even cope with the fact that the sun rose again and you have another day on this earth and you're contemplating suicide every moment, and you might need a little boost. And it's unfortunate that you don't have a loved one or a family member in your life or some type of inspiration or something that gives you enough of the pull in the right direction. And sometimes it can't come from your family because, just like you don't want to listen to your parents. They could tell you the exact same thing as somebody else, and for some reason it just might stick when someone else says it. But it's like, that's the time when you use medication. It should be a last resort for people, and yet they're being handed out like a Pez dispenser. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and that's what I think from the, my whole family, I think we were all dealing with our own struggles to where that's why my mom put me in therapy because nobody had the ability to give me the help, especially with how stubborn I was. My dad probably would have been the only one, and he had his own struggles with trying to he wasn't somebody that like shared his emotions. So, yeah, she became one of the most impactful people in my life growing up because she was always very supportive, but she never really told me the answer. She always let me figure it out. Of like, she would try to wake me up to reality, kind of like the conversation we had before. Is she would call me out on my shit and be like, "You're smarter than that. Like, why are you saying, oh no, it's not this or it's not that? You're smarter than that. So let's try to reevaluate. And I don't know who you're trying to fool because you're not going to fool me," which I think a lot of therapists don't do. I don't know if it's because they want returning clients or what, but they're just kind of sit there and, oh, let me make you feel comfortable, and oh, it's just a safe space. Like, no, what's the point of therapy if you're not going to improve and get better? And
What you just said, we cannot skip past. If you're a therapist, your job is to get your patient through the chaos, through the storm, through the darkness. Your job is to create a healthy psychological human being that can handle the difficulties of life. And life is difficult. Your job is not to make this safe space. If anything, it's the opposite. If you came to me for therapy, it's going to be the most uncomfortable moment of your day every single day. But actually, if you can reframe your mind, if you can take on the demons that live in your brain, if you can fight the fears that you have, it will be the most liberating part of your day. You might actually leave, even though during the process it's dark and difficult, you might leave uplifted, like, you know what? Maybe there's an escape. Because everybody's in a certain degree of a dark forest in their life at different points. And you want to be out of it. You don't get out of it by sitting down or laying down on the ground and staring up and saying, oh my God, at least I'm comfortable here. My legs don't hurt from walking. You have to walk your way out of it. Now, you might need a friend. You might need someone that guide you. You might need, a North Star to follow. You might need something, but you have to do the dark work. And like looking back, thank God you can reflect upon that now. It almost shows your healing because you can see, wow, the people that would have made me feel the way that might have been best weren't the ones that were helping me. The people that were helping me were the ones that were making me face what I did not want to face.
yeah, and therapy, I feel like it's a very rocky road when it comes to the therapist properly handling the situation. Because, I think back to when I first started, I was very fragile. And with how stubborn I was, if she would have approached it like a drill sergeant from the beginning, I would have been like, fuck this chick, I'm not coming back. So she knew well enough of like just trying to ease in and, get to know me and let me see that she has my best interest in mind. And then she started, when she saw progression and mentally I wasn't so just like foggy and not there, then she'd start, challenging me. And that is definitely what I needed. So I think that's what got me through a large portion of it. And she was also somebody that always called me, she didn't judge me for it, but when I was, so I did lacrosse freshman year and sophomore year. And then when I was 16, before I was even 16, I wanted a job so bad. I wanted to make my own money. I hated school, and I was like, get me out of here. I'd rather be working 40 hours a week. I don't care what it takes. I couldn't find any place that would hire me before 16. But my first job ever was Tomato Brothers in Howell. My sister worked there as a hostess, so she got me a job the day before my birthday, or it was the day of my birthday. I went and interviewed, which basically was just me getting on the schedule. And that kind of set off the path that I then went down. Restaurants are a very unique environment. I'm grateful for it. I was a good worker, I'd like to think, especially with my work ethic. But they gave me a lot of power at a young age, and the people that you're around are interesting. 80% of the people that work in the kitchen have some sort of record. That's why they're working there. And don't get me wrong, there were some awesome people that worked there that I have nothing but good things to say about, but you're exposed to a different caliber of people. So from 16, I started that environment is what introduced me to weed. So nobody forced me to do it by any means. That's just kind of what they would do. They'd, have a drink after work and go in the parking lot, smoke a joint, whatever. Nobody pressured me. It was just with my personality and how I am. I was like, let me try that.
100. I want you to keep going this because I think it's really spectacular, and we're going to drop a lot of insight. But like, I was picturing that moment. I can understand. I can vividly see the woman that you were, and you were so blissfully unaware of what you were walking into, in search of your independence and your power, and like, yeah, see, like, I'm going to go out and take on the world. The world is filled with more trapdoors than people could possibly imagine. And there's more spikes and thorns in every rose. And it's like, when you think you're in an environment that it's like, yeah, this is where my power lies, a lot of people get steamrolled like that. They go out into the world and they get taken advantage of horribly. They get mistreated. They get abused. They get run over. And it affects them so deeply on a psychological level that they almost never want to go back out into the world again, because they're like, yo, this, like, this is not what I thought. So it sounds like you didn't have any catastrophic events. You might have been disagreeable enough and like had your eyes on things enough, is what I'm picturing, to not end up in like, date rape happens, all kind of stuff like that happens. And you might have dodged a lot of the dangers that some girls would fall into if they were more gullible or things like that. But you got introduced to a culture that wasn't good for you.
Yeah, so I definitely, when I started working there, and me and my sister worked together, this is the oldest sister. We look like twins. When I was a kid, I would use her ID to get in places. And so her personality is a lot different than mine. And so I think a lot of the other employees were like, oh, this is just a younger Elizabeth. No. Elizabeth was a little bit more passive, flirty than I was. And at 16, when I would walk in the kitchen and somebody would try to make a comment to me, these grown men, and I would look at them and be like, what'd you say, pussy? And I was 16, hadn't even been there for a month, and they were like, who is this chick? But that's how I held myself, because I'm like, I'm not going to let people walk all over me. And I was the same way in high school, because growing up in Brighton, with the type of people that I think it's transformed, it's changed, but you get a lot of entitled people here. I mean, they have wealthy parents, and they have, I think it's great that their parents are able to give them as much as they're able to give them. It's awesome. But you can get judged very easily. And I never wanted people to walk all over me. So my way of handling that was to be a bitch. And if you probably talk to anybody I went to high school with, they'd probably, oh, Emma? She's not a fan of her. But that's just how I was. I was dealing with my...
That was your shield for the world, though, right? Like, that was you with your sword and shield saying, like, you're not going to hurt me. Like, I'm going to hurt you first. Like, because I'm not having it happen to me. I might be the baby in my family. I might have been excluded from that. But here's my sword and shield, and here's Emma. And assertiveness like that is very, very confrontational to people. Oh. They don't like the feeling of it, but you're doing it out of almost a protection mechanism. For the people listening to this, you might not even have known it to be that when you were young, but that was you protecting yourself. That was you being like, you're not going to harm me. Yeah. I'll harm you first. See my sword? I don't keep it sheathed.
Yeah, well, and with all my mental struggles I was going through, which I don't think really anybody knew about when I was in high school, because again, I never liked talking about it. You had these people that were so open, and I was just like, you're a fake, if anything, because that's what my therapist would always tell me. Is she's like, the reason you concern me so much is because if you had a plan, nobody would know, and you would just make it happen. And she's like, the people that are openly willing to, I'm not feeling my depression, blah, blah, blah. She's like, it might sound heartless, but they're usually not somebody to be concerned about. So that's how I was. I just was dealing too much mentally that was my way of handling the situation. So the same thing took over when I was in the restaurant business. But I was naive to a lot of things. One of which is I was like, oh, there's, older guys that want to talk to me or hang out with me.
They think I'm awesome. They think I'm just wonderful.
Yeah. And obviously looking back, I was an idiot, but when I was 16, I was hanging out with a busser that was 21. And it was like, I completely agreed to, I wasn't, held against my will or anything. And to me, I was like, guy didn't have a car. And I'm like, I drive him around. I'm so cool. But that ended up causing a lot of issues between my dad and I, because my sister worked there, so she obviously was like, this isn't okay. Told my dad. With my mental struggles, there was a moment that I like I avoided being home because I don't really know what the reason was, but I just didn't like how I felt in the environment. Which I mean, there's nothing bad my parents ever did or my siblings.
It might have been, though, because the way you were living in your actions. Do you want to stand in front of your father and go through those things? Do you want to be saying that you're seeing a 21-year-old guy and there's probably some deep subconscious aspect to that, because if you're fully proud of the way you're living and you're happy in your life, I don't think the environment would be that hard on you. But I think if you're trying to be in that environment, looking at a loving father who is also disagreeable, and you probably wouldn't even want to try to have the conversation of like, no, I want to be able to hang out with this person and it is right, because your father would say, the hell it is. What do you think a 21-year-old man is looking for with a 16-year-old young girl up at the front?
Yeah, nothing good. And I think even more than that too, I was trying to find somewhere that I felt like I belonged, because I always had like a different personality to a lot of people, and like not having a whole lot of friends. And so I kind of was like, oh, well, like these people here like me. They think I'm funny because I'm outspoken and they can't walk all over me. So like maybe this is where I'm meant to be. Basically, I had a situation one day where I was definitely not doing well mentally. I was like cutting myself. And my mom was super concerned. She's like, you're not going to be, you're going to school, work, and that's it. And I was arguing with her, and I'm like, no, there was a girl that I worked with who had a sister that was my age, and then she was older. She had a house in Weberville, and I wanted to stay with her for a bit because I was like, I just need to get out of this environment. Like, I just feel like I can't breathe in this household. And I was like, I just want to get away. And her name is Melissa.
Wait, looking back, do you know why?
I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, because my parents gave me nothing but love throughout my whole childhood. And don't get me wrong, nothing, like there was obviously parts that weren't perfect, but compared to a lot of other people's situations, it was fine. And I've never really been able to figure out why I felt that way, but I was bound and determined to not be staying there. And I mean, this Melissa girl, I'm really grateful for, because she even, like, she came over and let my parents meet her, and she was like, I'm going to make sure she gets to school. She lived in Weberville and I was going to Brighton, and she was driving me to school every day. Well, basically, before this agreement had happened, I was trying to get my car keys from my mom. It was my parents' car, but the car I drove. And I was trying to leave. My dad's at work. My sister's working at Tomato Brothers. My other sister's in school at this time. Anyway, an argument takes place, and like my mom, she's passive. I tackled her for the car keys because I'm like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. Like, you're not going to tell me. And she's crying. She's trying to control me. Nobody else is home. So I get the keys, but she gets my phone. So I drive away. And I'm like, okay, what's the only place I can go that I can get Melissa's number? Tomato Brothers, 'cause she worked there too. So I drive to Tomato Brothers, and coincidentally, that guy that I was talking to, it was his day off, and he was there with another guy that worked there eating. And my sister had just left and was like crying because my mom had called her and was like, if any of you hear from Emma, like, tell me. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what she's doing. And so the other guy, not the guy I was talking to, had like kind of had a weird relationship with my sister or whatever. And I think Elizabeth had opened up to him about kind of everything that I was going through that I didn't really tell a lot of people about. And so when they saw me, they were like, what the fuck is going on? Your sister was just here. Like, why are you? And I was just like, you better not fucking call her. Like, I'm fine. And then his name was Alex. He was like, kind of like, went almost like a big brother mode. He was just like, what are you doing with your life? Why are you treating yourself this way? Like, why? And meanwhile, the other guy's just fucking sitting there. And I said, I'm like, I'm not gonna, I'm not asking a lot. I just want to be out of the house for a little bit. Melissa agreed to do all this stuff, whatever. And he's like, well, if you're not going to let me call your sister, then you're like, I'm watching you all day. Like, you're staying with me because I'm going to make sure that you're not. And I think Melissa was doing something. So he's like, until she's ready to come and like she can be with you, you're staying with me. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And again, that other guy, that Buster, the 21-year-old, is there too. So they finish eating and I was sitting with them. We get up and we're standing in the lobby about to leave to go out the front door. And my dad walks out of the kitchen door. And another girl that worked back there like points down to me. And I'm like, holy fucking shit. Had left work. And he worked in Novi. And drove. And I mean, I wasn't there that long. He had to be fucking flying. Drove all the way there. Came in the back door. And he thought, because the other guy, the Alex guy, was like buffer, a bigger guy. He thought that was him. And he was like getting in his face. And he's like, who the fuck do you think you are? I'm standing there crying. Like, oh my God. And he was like, sir, this is not me. So he starts getting in the other guy's face. Alex stepped between them and was like, you need to get out of here. Like, this is not the place to be doing this. I'm freaking out. My dad's like, Emma, I just want to talk to you. I just want to talk to you. And I'm like, you think I'm stupid? So I walk in the parking lot with my dad, and I'm like, I need to get away. I just don't feel mentally safe here. And my car was gone because he had driven. I think he picked up my mom, and she took the spare keys, and she left with my car. So he was the only way for me to get out of there. And he's like, just sit in the car, have a conversation with me. I'm like, I'm not getting in that fucking car with you. And he was like, you're making a mistake. You're going down a bad path. And I was like, then so be it. I'm not going anywhere with you. So he ended up leaving. He gave up. And so I stayed with those two guys for the day, and then Melissa ended up freeing up. And I ended up spending, I don't think it was a week. I think it was a couple days. And, like, shout out to Melissa. She drove me to school. I didn't have clothes. She was letting me wear her clothes, and was just allowing me to stay with her and figure out whatever I had going on, which I still can't really pinpoint why I felt so strongly about not being at home. Maybe it was just my stubbornness, but that was definitely a moment that was like months later when me and my dad had a discussion about it. That was the only time, aside from when my mom's mom passed away, that I ever saw him cry. And he was just like, why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you putting yourself through this? Like, this is not a good situation. Like, he's 21. And he called the cops after that and talked to a cop about, like, and I think whatever in the state of Michigan, like, if I agree, then there's nothing they can really do. And I don't know. But yeah, he was very, that challenged our relationship a lot. But I think going through that with him in my older age now made me closer to him. So yeah, that was.
Well, and you probably saw your father's love for you now that you look back. Because can you imagine, let's reframe this where that's your child one day, that you're like just desperately trying to keep on the right path. They're objectively doing something that's not great for them, that you don't understand at all where the struggle's coming from. So you probably think the absolute worst, like, did something extreme happen to my daughter that I don't know about? Is she on drugs? Is it like this is not my daughter. What is happening? And it's like the helplessness that your father must have felt in those moments. And the fact that he walked away and left you there, the amount of character it took in your father to do that and not like forcibly against your will grab a hold of you and stuff you in the vehicle, wow. And that was probably an incredible moment in your life for your personal progression, because things don't normally come to a head to that degree where like you are standing in full defiance of your father, of the family that raised you, of all these things, trying to just take your place in the world. Because that's what your psychology was trying to do. You want to carve Emma's path, and you don't give a shit about what other people tell you that path should be. You're like, no, I know better than you. You know what I mean? And maybe one day, just the idea seeped into your mind that, like, I need to get out of this house. And then if that idea is not tempered with rational thought and, like, all the reasons that that's not going to fix it, that can sprout into a full-on drive. Like, people are controlled by the way that they feel. That's our limbic system. So all of a sudden, you had that idea that maybe flourished in your brain that at 16 years of age is like, this is the answer. It's not me. It's them. You know what I mean? Because looking in the mirror is much more difficult. This Melissa woman is a superhero in this story.
Oh, yeah.
Why in the world does she take on all of this burden and hassle and stress of another person that is clearly struggling, other than just like love in her heart for the person that she saw it in you? That's amazing. You started to speak about you fell into weed. You got off that topic a little bit. Let's talk about that, because a lot of people They constantly talk about the upside of weed. They constantly talk about it's medicinal and there are all these health benefits and I'm not addicted and I could stop whenever I want. And I'm not a lesser version of myself when I sit around smoking all day and do nothing. No, like they're delusional and they won't accept reality. And some people can be recreational marijuana users and live a very happy, successful life. Some people are complete slaves to marijuana and it destroys their human potential. And until we can start admitting those truths, it's going to plague society. And it doesn't need to plague society. And it's not like there aren't a million other things that plague society, but it's another trapdoor for people. So you said due to that culture, you got sucked into smoking. Did this event happen before or after that? And like just any insight that you can pull from that period, because I remember the first time I smoked and like I only did it a couple times in my life. And it's funny because I did it to experiment with my own brain, which is like the dumbest thing ever. Like I didn't have my first beer until I think I was like 20 or 21. I never smoked a cigarette. I don't care about drugs at all. But I wanted to see why people were so fascinated, almost out of like a curiosity. I was like, why are these people, so many people make their identity about being a marijuana user. They'll be wearing socks with marijuana plants on it. They'll shirt. They want to go to Blood Bash. Like their identity becomes like, hey, I smoke weed. I'm like looking at it from the outside like, yeah, it's a fucking activity that you do. And it's your entire being, existence, drive, reason for your happiness. So I smoke to be like, I need to know what is it. And before you describe your experience, and I was much older and probably in a much different psychological state because I had already been through so much darkness by the time I smoked. I was in a pretty good frame of mind. It almost like for the first time ever made me recognize that the method of thinking I had wasn't the only method. It was almost like, imagine if I had only ever looked at life through a certain lens and all of my perceptions, my ability to process information, all of those things had only ever come through that lens because I had only ever been in one consciousness state. People don't think about that often. If you've never drank, you've never smoked, you've never altered your consciousness voluntarily, you have only ever processed all the input one way. And when I smoked for the first time, it was like all of a sudden I was having different methods of thinking. I was experiencing a feeling in my body that I had never had before. Imagine being, 20 years old and being like, what the hell is going on? It actually, in my opinion, it did broaden my perspectives a little bit because it made me question some things a little bit more. Like, wait, maybe there's perceptions that I've never considered that I should consider because just because I viewed things through one lens doesn't mean that there aren't other lenses. So for me, it was actually, I think, a very good experience. I only smoked a handful of times in my whole life, probably less than 10 ever. I pulled what I needed out of it and I use it as like a tool for growth. That's not common. That's not the normal story. What was your experience like, and where does that fall in timeline with all this chaos?
Yeah, so that happened after I started smoking, and I'd say like my experience with weed would be like the opposite of yours, because starting so young and being immediately like, there's some girls that you'll talk to, like especially around that age, they'll be like, I never spent money on it. I just always used other people, blah, blah, blah. No, I was very quickly, every single day, as many times a day as I could. To where I think starting at such a young age, you said you used it to try to open your mind. My mind was so fogged immediately for years. Like it took me, there was a lot of different moments I think that I went through for me to realize like this is not helping me. I was using it to numb myself. I think it's just like, as much as people are going to hate this comparison, it's just like alcohol in that way. Don't get me wrong, alcohol is worse. My dad was always told me that as a kid. He, being a firefighter, would go on runs of these people that are trying to quit alcohol and they're shaking and fiending because their body is withdrawing. And same thing, with obviously more intense drugs. But he's like, I've never gone on a run of somebody that overdosed on weed. Like, if it was up to me, alcohol would be illegal and weed would be legal. Because, he drinking and driving and all this stuff that he saw. And sometimes it was in a trailer park. Sometimes it was in a $1 million mansion. It didn't matter. People were using it to try to feel a way that they didn't want to feel. And that's, I think, how I use weed. I didn't really drink underage until I was a little older, but there were a lot of different instances like, so for example, because I did lacrosse freshman, sophomore year, well, coincidentally, the girl that I was friends with started smoking weed at a similar time, but with her brother. And so then that became, we were like, oh, well, now we're both smoking weed. Fuck school. Like, why do we even go? And so that's what she lived really close to the school. And there would be days I'd roll into the parking lot at 6 a.m. and be like, I don't want to be here. And I would just be like, yo, her mom was a phlebotomist and her dad worked. So her mom left for work at like 2 a.m. and so her house was empty. So we'd be like, let's go kick it at your house. And then we'll dip when your mom shows up at 2 o'clock and go get food or whatever. And we would I wasn't as much of a, like, I didn't buy weed socks and all that, but people knew that I smoked. And I don't know if maybe that made people not take me that seriously, but I did. I mean, it was 100% of who I was. And it affected a lot of, I feel like, I didn't think it affected me. I was like, no, I can do this and still live life and, make money and whatever. But it did, my world revolved around it, like, every day. That's all I thought about. I couldn't, there's some people that are like, yeah, I don't smoke until I get home or whatever. I was smoking right in the morning, and every break I had, I mean, when I worked at the restaurant on my double, the manager knew. I was like, I'm going to smoke a bowl in my car, be back in 30 minutes. But that was the restaurant industry. It was just how I lived my life. And there were a lot of moments, because, I mean, what weed is now was not weed when I started smoking. I mean, you were getting it from Joe Schmo's basement that was growing it at his mama's house. When the pandemic hit and you could do curbside pickup, I was like, what is going on? This is crazy. Never in my wildest dreams. I was trying to buy it in a Walgreens parking lot from some guy of a friend and hope that a cop didn't show up when I'm handing him cash and he's handing me this stinky bag. And it was just a lot different. And I think it's almost not a good thing, because don't get me wrong, there are people that can use it and it doesn't affect them, but it's too easy to get. And now it's like there's a business out of it to where, you're paying a high price usually for it. And but yeah, there were instances definitely that I got close to getting in trouble. And then one particular one, which is kind of skipping pretty far ahead, but at my current job, I went on my lunch and was smoking in a park and ride. And I feel like we had this discussion before, but I was smoking wax. So basically, it's just like extracted from weed, and it's more potent, but it doesn't smell as bad. It still smells, but doesn't smell as bad. And that's why I liked it, because then I hated going into places and I would just reek, and everybody knew that I was smoking. So, and I mean, I started using wax when I was at Tomato Brothers. So, and mind you, in order to use wax, you're using a torch to torch whatever you're using. There's nectar collectors, bongs, whatever. And then you're inhaling that. And that's butane that you're using to fill the torch to do. So this is, I was doing this for years, not thinking that I'm harming myself at all. And I was at the park and ride on my lunch, and I had a little, I was a bad kid. I had a little bong that I drove around with. And a lot of the time I would do it while I was driving. I'd drive with my knee, and I'd be on a dirt road. It's not good. My dad would be ashamed. And so I was like, I looked to my left, looked to my right, and I'm like, okay, nobody's around. So I have a thing sticking out of my mouth that has the dab on the end of it, and I'm torching this bong. And I had this weird feeling. I was like, man, this would be a terrible thing for a cop to roll up to. And then all of a sudden I hear boop, boop. And I look over, and there's a sheriff backed into the parking spot next to me. And I'm like, well, I'm done. And so my window's cracked, and he rolls his window down, and he's like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, nope. And he's like, how old are you? And I had just turned 21. So yeah, this is skipping ahead a bit, but it took me a while to, and I'm like, I just turned 21. And he's like, where are you supposed to be right now? And I was like, work, right over there. I'm on lunch. And because my dad's a firefighter. I respect the police. I respect law enforcement. I'm not about to lie. I'm not going to, you call me red-handed here. And he's like, so because my dad's a firefighter, we have union stickers on all of our vehicles. And he's like, I saw the union sticker on your car, and I wanted to make sure whoever was in here was okay. What city does your dad work for? And I'm like, yep, Novi. And he's like, can you call him? I'm like, yep, not a problem. Now, at this point, my dad switched to nights, so I knew he was sleeping. And so I told him, I was like, I'll try to call his cell phone once, but he's probably sleeping. If he doesn't answer, I'll call my mom. She'll wake him up. And he's like, whatever. I'm like, okay. So obviously he doesn't answer. I call my mom. My chipper old mom, she's like, hi, Emma, what are you doing? I'm like, I got a sheriff here that wants to talk to Papa. I call my dad Papa. I was like, can you wake him up? She's like, yeah, 1 second. And I hear her, like, because they sleep with a fan, like, go in the room, wake him up. And I give him the phone, and he's like, yeah, I was just at the park and ride. And now this is probably, like, a story I shouldn't be telling, but I don't really know the guy. But he was like, I found your daughter, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to make sure she gives all of this stuff to you. And as a courtesy to you, I'm not going to arrest her or anything. And he was like, I appreciate that. Can you please give her one of your cards, whatever. Because that's not typical. I mean, that I could have been screwed. And so he, like, took the dab thing that I had and, like, put it in the ground and, like, dug it around, made me put the bong in my trunk, and he's like, you're going to give that to your dad, which I didn't. He gave me his card. I had one of my dad's cards, and I gave him that. And I went back to work, and I just started bawling. I was like, holy, like, he could have just ruined my life if he wanted to. Like, I could have.
No, you could have just ruined your
life.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had the option to make it.
Hold you accountable for those actions.
100%.
It's important to phrase things like this, because if people look at someone else as like, my life was ruined by that police officer. No, your life was ruined by the consequences of your actions. Like, that's what could have got you. And honestly, I think your honesty and you just being like, it is what it is, he probably saw the good in you. Not some like, fuck you. Imagine if you were just like, get the blah, 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 like anything, or tried to lie to him or anything. You were going to jail. Like, you were done for. You being who you were and just owning up to, like, that was you basically like, yes, I'm guilty. I 100% know it. It's my fault. Choose to have mercy or not. And he chose to have mercy on you. But it's incredibly important about how we phrase that, because it's like, it's, it was the consequences.
Yeah, and it was 100% my fault. So my dad made me write a letter to him, and he was like, be very vague, because he could get in trouble for this, but like basically saying thank you for helping me that day, because he's like, you understand, that could have been on your record forever. That could have cost you a lot of money. Like, you were being stupid. And I'm like, yeah, you're not wrong at all. That moment, I quit for a few months, because I was like, yeah, I can't do this again. Got back into it. And I think a lot of it was me thinking that it helped my mental health. I'm like, oh, well, this is what I need, because then it helps me think. I don't worry so much. I've always been an overthinker. I've always had a very active brain. And I would literally tell myself, I could use to lose a couple brain cells. It's not a bad thing. Like, what sort of rationalization is that? But it was what I used as a crutch, 100%. And I think, as I got older and I would go see Patty, she was like, I'm not going to judge you for what you do. Like, my son, he enjoys it, whatever. It's not as bad as certain things. But there are clinical studies done that it makes your anxiety worse. And I'm not going to let you try to argue that that's not the case. And I just want you to be aware of the situation at hand. She's like, again, I'm not going to force you to do one. She knew how I was. She's like, I'm not going to force you to do, like, stop or whatever.
And honestly, people like you need to be spoken to like that, because nobody can force you to do anything. I'm the same way. You can't tell me, if you're my therapist and you're like, oh, I'm not going to force you, I'm like, because you can't. There's nothing you can do about it. But if they can present ideas in a way where the idea plants in your brain that maybe they're right, maybe this is a coping mechanism that is going to make me much worse in the long term, you have to feel that it is your decision and the right decision to do anything, right? Oh, yeah. I'm wired the same way. I will literally die on a hill on concept principle that you can't make me move if I don't want to move. And I think it's very important to be like that. Like, how else can you be autonomous and really take control of yourself in this world if you don't have that character trait? I know a lot of people that they get pushed over by a slight breeze, and like that is not a good trait to have. But people have to deal with us in a different way, because if you try to push me, I will violently push back. It's just the way that I'm at. You know what I mean? So you really found the right person for you in that Patty woman. Like, throughout hearing this story, that woman is an integral part of you becoming the person that you're supposed to be. So keep going with the story. I'm loving this.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, I skipped a good portion of.
No, yeah. There's actually something I want to bounce back to. Those days, you're skipping school, you're doing all the wrong things, you're making all the bad decisions. Objectively, without a doubt, you're fucking up. Without a doubt. You're intelligent enough to realize that if you really were to look at it. How were you getting through each day without having the realization, like, I am fucking up so bad, and this is not the woman that my family raised me to be. Like, you're self-medicating constantly, you're smoking weed all the time. You somehow never looked inward enough during those times. Why not? And or what were you finding in those times? Because your brain, I'm sure, was thinking all kind of. Did you find anything during those times that you still hold as valuable? Like, was there any moments from that period of your life that although the time was dark, you can find gold in dark places? Do you remember any things of substantial value during that period? Or was it all just this like wasted time fogged that you finally came out of?
That one's a tough one, because I think it was 100% my personality of, I know better than everybody, and this is what is best for me. And on top of that, being surrounded by people that were living the same way. The friend that I had in high school, she was like, I mean, I almost didn't graduate, not because of my grades. I mean, I manipulated the system to the best of my ability, because I looked at what I needed to graduate. And when so your year prior, so like your junior year, the counselor has you in to schedule classes for your senior year. And when I went in for it was my sophomore year to my junior year. When I went in, the counselor was just like, okay, so this is, you have to have a math, science, English, history, whatever. And I was like, yep, no, I'm not signing up for that. She's like, well, it's actually required. I'm like, yeah. So in my graduation requirements, I need Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, and a fourth year math. So if you were bad at math or slow or whatever you want to call it, you could break up Algebra 1 into 2 years, our 8th grade and our 9th grade year, and then go Geometry, then Algebra 2, and then 4th year. I took Algebra 1 in 8th grade. I was actually good at math. I had a terrible teacher my 8th grade year that kind of really screwed me going in, but nonetheless, I took it that year. So I took Geometry my freshman year and Algebra 2 my sophomore year, and I go, next year's not my 4th year. I'm not a senior yet. And she's like, well, with college applications, I go, I'm not going to college. And she's like, well, you might change your mind down the line. I'm like, college is a business. If they want my money, they'll take my money. I don't need to mentally put myself through a pre-AP or whatever the hell class when I don't even want to be here. So no, I'm not taking this math class. And I actually did the same thing with my friend at the time, because she had taken somehow, like the electives, all of the ones that were left that were available, she had already taken. And the one that the counselor was trying to get her to take was like a CAD design, and she hated it when she took it. And she was like telling me about it, and she's like, yeah, it's bullshit, like that they're making me do that. I'm like, they can't. No. So I went with her to the counselor, and I was like
a legal representative. Speaking on behalf of my client here, you need to go ahead and retract your previous statement, because it's absolute nonsense. I'm looking at myself in female form, because you know what's also weird about the people that love math or that appreciate logic? We always look for efficiencies, and you can't make me, and nope. If these are the rules, and there's within these rules, I can do this thing. You made them, not me.
Exactly.
We're going to apply them. You can't selectively apply. I have that trait very badly too. And like hearing these stories, it's like, as you're telling me, I probably have a much deeper understanding than some people, because I know exactly what your brain was thinking. Like, oh yeah, watch this. Like, I'm going to show you that that's not accurate.
Yeah. Well, and she had the personality, her name was Spencer. She had the personality that she didn't, Like, she wasn't going to argue with an adult. They knew better. And so I sat there and I went with her and I go, she already took CAD. You can't make somebody take another class unless she wanted to. You're not going to make her. So from where I sit, because you normally had 6 classes in a day, I was like, either she's going to come in an hour late, leave an hour early, or you're going to find a different class for her to take, because that's bullshit. And the counselor was like, who is this chick? And
Did you win your case?
I did. I think she took like sign language online or some shit. I can't even remember, but I remember her dad being like, you're such a good friend for doing that for her. Like, thank you for, but to me, it was just more like, who are you? Who are you to tell us? Like, that's bullshit.
Well, you were trying to represent what is right, the truth, the reality. You knew what was or wasn't possible, and you stood on that. And you happened to be right. Because a lot of times people will stand up on things and they're not right. They don't know their rights or they don't know the law at all. And they're like, I'm going to take this stance. And then they get arrested. And you knew what was accurate and you stood on that. And that's a very, very admirable trait. It's very impressive that you could do that at that age. And imagine being that guidance counselor, having this little fireball sitting in front of you, being like, nuh-uh. I mean, it probably creates emotional reactions and stuff in them because they don't want to be disagreed with like that, but you weren't doing anything wrong and you were trying to do a favor or service for someone you cared about.
Yeah, and I wasn't being, rude, but unfortunately, I feel like there's like teachers and counselors that they're like, well, I'm the adult, you're the kid, and it's like, I don't care.
Don't care about that at all.
Yeah, like she doesn't want to, it's not like it's a class she enjoyed and okay, like it's known throughout high school, you don't take electives more than once unless newspaper was the only one that you could take more than once, which I've got a story with that because I took that. But yeah, so I made my junior and senior year as easy as I possibly could because I had no interest in college. I was working illegal hours for a high schooler. I was working doubles every Saturday and Sunday, and then as many days as I could after work because I just wanted to make money so that I could buy weed and do what I wanted to do. But I was not interested in school at all, and I think it's all. My dad was also very. When we were young, education's important. You need to prioritize your education. Once we got older, once I hit high school, pretty much, he said, because both my sisters went to college, he said, college is a business, and there's benefits to it, but it's also, you're a kid. You might not know fully what you want to do. And he said, so don't think you're behind the 8 ball if you don't go to college right away. And I had like a family member, like distant through marriage or something, that went back to law school when they were like in their 60s. And he used that as an example. He's like, he's in his 60s and he's going back to college. So don't feel like at 18, and I was 17 when I graduated, he's like, don't feel like you have to be pressured into doing this. He's like, because college isn't cheap. And you're going to spend this money, and guess what? You're probably just going to go and party because that's what everybody does when they're there, unless they've known for years. I think there are some kids that like, oh, this is what my parents did and I'm passionate about it, or I've just always been interested in being a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever that's actually worth going to school for. But so that was a big help, I think, to my, okay, well, that's good to know. And that's why I think I worked so hard in school. And then that's the same job that I had once I graduated with. But then I worked for one of their carryouts too, to where like I was working every day, all day, because I was like, well, I'm not going to school, so why not work? But in that was just, well, I'll smoke, I'll work, whatever. But with newspaper, so I took a newspaper class. It was the only elective you could take as many times as you wanted because, the news is always changing. I took in my junior year. My junior year was when my mental health was probably the worst. And whenever I showed up to school, I didn't have a backpack. I didn't carry books around. I had this Avengers blanket that I'd wrap around myself, and I would like sleep in a lot of my classes and just like nobody was going to tell me what to do. I like barely passed. I knew what I needed to graduate, so I would barely pass the classes I needed to graduate. So I had this newspaper class, and I wasn't doing so well mentally. Well, the teacher had made a couple comments like in front of the class about like, oh, I wonder if Emma's going to do work today, or I wonder if... Now, I didn't have the energy to argue with him, whatever. Well, some of the people that took the class their junior year realized, because it always was the same hour as your 4th hour, and that would, depending on what 4th hour you had, would then choose what lunch you had, A, B, or C. So because you could take it as many times as you wanted, people got smart, and they're like, wait a minute, I'll sign up with this class with my friends, and then we have a class together and we get the same lunch. So that's what I did with the girl that I was friends with, is we signed up for this class, and then it became, the class was almost going to get shut down because nobody was taking it. Well, this class like was almost overflowing because so many kids were taking it. And then I wanted revenge my senior year because I'm like, you wanted to shit talk me in front of the class, you picked the wrong person. So because there were so many kids, he would have to, like, you would have to write articles about various things. And then he would have to sift through, and there'd be certain people's that wouldn't get published in the newspaper because there was only so much room. But you were still required to do like 2 or something like that. And I was never a good writer, and I also didn't really apply myself much. So my shit never got chosen. And so finally I'm like, I'm not going to do it. I don't even need this to graduate. And you're not even, like, don't get me wrong, I probably wasn't trying to improve, but I'm also like, I'm not going to waste my energy on this. So he, like, made an announcement in front of the class their senior year about, and, like, called me out. And he's like, there's a few of you, and he's like, Emma, he's like, that for whatever reason haven't been turning in these articles. And, you know, regardless of the circumstance, you know, you need to be prioritizing. And so I just, in front of the whole class, was like, why am I going to spend my energy doing this work and trying to, because like you would have to interview certain, like say you did about the swim team, you'd have to find people from the swim team and interview them and whatever. I was like, why am I going to spend my energy doing this if I know you're never going to publish my stuff because I'm not a good writer? And you've told me that. So, and there were like multiple other kids that were just like, yeah, what she said. To the point where he like talked to the principal and was like, this girl is making it so I can't even run my class because she's turning everybody, not everybody, but like people against me that were kind of in the same boat. Like my friend was kind of, I think maybe some of her articles got published, but she was like, yeah, that makes sense. Why are we doing that? So the principal I had like a couple weeks for that class. I had to sit in the principal's office and, and he had known me since like middle school. So when I went to talk to him about it, he was like, what is going on? Like, you've never gotten in trouble over the whole length of your middle school and high school career. And all of a sudden your senior year, like what is going on? And so I ended up, I think I got pretty emotional and I just told him, I was like, well, he was an asshole to me last year and I wasn't doing good mentally and he was calling me out in front of the class and making comments he shouldn't have made. So now he's going to get payback for it. And so he was pretty easy on me. He didn't even really make me do anything when I was sitting in the principal's office. And so, yeah, then again with that, so his name was Mr. Day, Todd Day. And I had a moment because you had the ability, so we all had the same lunch, but then because you had the ability to like interview people in the school, on the whiteboard you would just write your name and where you were going. Like, oh, this class to interview this person. And you could like leave and go to an interview. Well, me and Spencer would be like, we going to get lunch. We're going to be back at the end of the class. So we left one day and we went and got Panera and we smoked. And this was the dead of winter. So it was cold outside. And our dumbass left all the windows up in the car and went to Panera. We were like, okay, let's go back to school. At this time, like, I don't know how we got back in because it wasn't through the front door because usually it's all locked down and then through the front door you have to like buzz in. So came back and sat in the class and there were like less than 5 minutes left to class. And we sit down and a junior, because I was a senior, like puts her head up and she goes, what smells like skunk? And Spencer, being intelligent, immediately stands up and walks out of the class because she's just like, I'm out. And I'm sitting there like, this probably isn't good. And then Mr. Day comes up to me. He goes, so, leave, go get some. I had a fucking Panera cup, like a dumbass. he's like, so you leave, you go get some Panera, smoke a little weed, come back to school. And I'm like, huh? No. Well, that was like, he could have gotten me in trouble. And he didn't, he like tried to, I think he talked to me and was just like, Emma, like you can't be doing this. Like you need to be more intelligent. Like if it's that obvious to me, it's that obvious to all your classmates. Like you need to be smarter. Well, fun fact, when you graduate, when you get your diploma, because like when you're walking on stage, it's like, I don't know what it is that they hand to you, but then afterwards you get like an envelope that has like other paperwork. And teachers had the ability to like write notes to put in there. And I got one like generic one that I think this girl wrote to everybody. And then there was one from Mr. Day, and I still have it somewhere. I don't know where. But it was to the effect of he had 2 sons, younger kids. And he said, you know, as a father, I learn every single day how I could be a better dad to my kids and like different ways to approach parenting. And he said, I found it ironic that when we were given the opportunity to write these letters, you were the only person that came to mind. And I was like, wow. Like, I was shocked because I did not get along with him at all. And for a grown man to admit to a 17-year-old that maybe he didn't make the best decision, and obviously I didn't either, but I was also like, it wasn't right how I acted, but I was thinking about how he treated me, and I was like, okay, yeah, you're going to see. And to this day, I've thought about like trying to figure out if he still works for the schools or reach back out to him, because I kind of wanted him to see like, see, I'm not so much of a piece of shit anymore. I actually kind of got my life together. But that was like another very impactful thing that I felt like I went through of like, he could have gotten me in trouble. He could have just not even written me anything or said anything, but he made an effort and kind of apologized in a way. And I was like, wow, I respect him a lot for doing that, because he could have just left it.
So there's so much to unpack in that story. And there's like, you know what's cool about, as you're telling me this, first of all, I'm loving the dialogue, but I see the correlation between everything now, like the periods of your life and how you were acting and why you were acting that way and your mindset in those moments and the consequences of your action that steered you different directions. And like, it sounds like you knew for a fact it was incredibly refreshing to have that adult be able to take on his conscience that like, you know what, I should have done better too. Mm-hmm. Yes, you should have done better, hands down. But like, I should have done better. That's a big moment in your life too. That's a big like light bulb go off, like, whoa, maybe things aren't as bad. Maybe that guy's not as much of a piece of shit as I think he is. Mm-hmm. And he thought I was. Maybe we were both people just struggling with a difficult dynamic. Me because of all the things I was going through. Him because he was dealing with a student of my caliber at the time, and me not liking that he made that caliber known. Mm-hmm. But maybe if he doesn't make that known, maybe you don't make the changes. Like Steve Jobs' quote, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. Mm-hmm. As you're telling this story, I'm connecting all the dots of your life that is slowly bringing you to the woman that reconnects to her power. So going through school, not to skip it all or anything like that, when did you finally start to get that habit under control? Because the way you speak about it now, you can easily reflect upon the fact that like weed wasn't good for me. It wasn't something that was making me into the person that I'm meant to be. Where does that realization come in? Because during this time, it's all, you know, maybe it's all the way to the police story, but then you said you fell back into the habit. You said after the wax thing, a couple months later, you had a couple months clean. You were probably scared straight for a little bit, like, I'm going to avoid that. And then you get sucked back into habits. Mm-hmm. When were you able to kind of finally shake its grip on you? And let's just, I guess, keep the progression of your story. What are the other moments that you remember in your life, whether in school, senior year, out of school, you know, that really hit you hard? Because the woman that sits here today is so far from that young fireball making all these decisions. And it's like anyone that listens to this episode, they may not realize how far removed you are from that Emma. Mm-hmm. Like that Emma probably almost feels like a different lifetime to you. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like, that was me at one period. What was I thinking? How did I rationalize these things? And it's like your quest for efficiency was like cracking me up over here the whole time. Like I won't be on camera a lot, but it's like because I understand that method of thinking. Mm-hmm. And you would have been a unbelievable lawyer, because so many of the lawyers that we have now, they're fucking lunatics. They're emotional, low caliber people that are attached to all these different identities that they can't think clearly and rationally and objectively and hold truth as the standard through which they measure all of their actions and decisions. But you do. Mm-hmm. You do care about truth. You do care about what is right. You do care about justice. Mm-hmm. Those type of things are what would make an amazing lawyer. But let's just go a little bit more into your story of like just those big moments. Like you've told me about multiple now, but like nowhere near have you explained how you are the woman that sits here today versus the young, misguided fireball. Let's just continue the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think going through a lot of that formed me into what I am today. It took a lot to get to that point, but
where does the reflection start then? Because you have to first recognize your current state is wrong, and then it's a whole dark journey to figure out what's right then. Because the moment you have to admit that what I'm doing is not right, that's a sad moment, and a lot of times it's a rock bottom for people to some degree, but that's where the magic happens. That's where you start to change. Where are those reflection points? What causes those reflection points? What really gets you to start saying, I'm a lot more than what I've been showing?
I don't think it was until fairly recently, if we're being honest, because I feel like
recently in the scale of months, years,
years, more like 2020 timeframe.
Okay, well then let's do this. Tell me about your life February of 2020, before the pandemic hits. Where were you at mentally? What was your life looking like? How were you living? What was the pandemic like for you? And then let's start to talk, how do you come out of that? Why the hell did you decide to train jiu-jitsu? All these things.
Yeah, so it's, I was working the current job that I'm still working in sales, and...
Wait, how did you get that job? You didn't tell that story at all, because you're in a high-powered position. You make good money. You have a position of authority. The girl that you've told up to this point on this podcast does not get that offer.
The way that I got the job was probably not.
Honesty is the best policy, and the more you make your story right within your own mind and right within the world, you being able to tell the story about that police officer and saying, I was caught smoking this wax and he could have ruined my life, and he probably should have. He probably should have done his job the right way, but he chose not to.
Yeah.
It is so important to bring clarity to your mind and your story, because it strengthens you. It validates you. Life's not fair. Maybe some kids go to jail for that. Maybe some kids have their life destroyed for that. Maybe, your story is your story. What you were dealt might not have been fair. You might have had certain obstacles that other people didn't have. Your story is your story, and the more you can tell it fully without embarrassment or shame, if you can't shake shame and guilt and things like that, you got it because of something about you, whether it was a decision made or your story, or maybe it wasn't even fair. But at the end of the day, you were given the opportunity, and if you weren't the right woman or couldn't become the right woman, you wouldn't have been able to keep it.
Yeah.
And you are still there, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not so much shame. I've owned it, and I've owned that the mistakes I've made in the past, I've learned and I've grown from. It's just more I wouldn't want to put other people in a bad situation that were
then
involved.
Just don't tell the people's names, but give me just the generalized, someone with a company that was in a position of authority saw something, et cetera.
Yeah, so it was basically a guy that used to work there that I went to a party at one point to see a different guy, that this guy was there that he was friends with. Months go by, and he had messaged me on Facebook and was just like, what have you been up to? Do you still smoke? Shocking. And I ended up hanging out with him for a little bit. He was at the time roommates with Danny Berry.
What? Oh my God, I know exactly who it is.
Whoops.
Wow. All right, so anyway, continue the story.
So the situation of what ended up in that, or what took place, was not anything I'm necessarily proud of, but I did what I could with what I had to do in my mind what was right, which was tell the truth to the other people that were involved, even though the guy was not a fan of it at all. But at the time I was working at Aldi, which I have nothing but good things to say about the store, especially the manager that I had at the time. Awesome guy. I was basically trying to find a place I could work that I could work my way up. I did not care about starting at the bottom and having, when my first job, I was making $7.25 an hour and minimum wage was $7. I thought I was a baller because I was a quarter above minimum wage. And now you got these people complaining about $15 an hour to flip a freaking burger. It drives me crazy. But I was just trying to find a place that there wouldn't reach a point where I had to have a degree to get further, because I didn't like school. And if it was a logical reason to go back to school, that it was actually going to benefit me, that's one thing. But to me, and what I've noticed, my dad always would say this thing when I was a kid, that, Emma, there's people that I know that are doctors or lawyers that I wouldn't trust to cut my fucking lawn. And that always kind of made me think like, because I think especially when you're younger and even in the age that I am, like more maybe that people that haven't matured to the level that I have, you get intimidated by people like that. You're like, oh, they're at a higher level than I am. And you know what? A lot of those people ain't shit. They just made the decision to get a piece of paper. That's it. But it doesn't mean that they're any smarter than you, any better than you. Like they could have a lot more issues, if anything, than you, and they just put on a better front. So at Aldi, I was trying to work my way up, and it was just very repetitive. And then this guy that ran the store manager, who was, again, one of the best managers I ever came across, he had to be in his 30s at this time, but started working for the company at 18 at the warehouse that's in Weberville, wanted to move up, and they basically said, well, there's a lot more employees at the warehouse, you'd have a better chance at a store. Moved to a store, worked his way up to running a store. Just great guy, nothing but good things to say about him. There was a girl that would come in, she was the district manager. There was something about her that always rubbed me the wrong way. She was nice. I never had an issue with her, but she would like come in and we would play these games of like, oh, we're going to see who can check out people like the quickest and all that stuff. And finally, like after she left one day, I was talking to, his name was Brian. I was like, how did she get the position she got? And he's like, oh, she went to business school. And I was like, so could you get her job? He's like, no, I don't have a degree. And I said, and he knew by the look on my face, he was just like, and I was like, I'm not saying that she's a bad person, but you know this company like the back of your hand. You've been involved in every aspect. And not only, like, he was the type of manager, he would never make any of us do something that he himself hadn't done. There were like Friday nights you would have to put out the special buy section, so you would be there past close, and we would be there till midnight. And like certain times of year, there's like, it's so difficult to make the space. And he would like, it was usually 3 people, him, like some sort of manager and 2 others. Anytime he would do it, by midnight, he'd be like, all right, you guys are good to go. He would be there till like 4 a.m. and then be back there the next day at like 8 a.m. Just a great manager. Like never, always put his employees, like the thoughts of his employees first. And I feel like he was very impactful on the way that I choose to treat my employees. I don't even like saying that because I feel like I'm just there to help them. I'm not there to be in charge of them. But anyway, when I was hanging out with these people smoking, whatever, I was talking about how like, man, I like this place. I've got nothing but good things to say about shopping there, and like the way they run the company is very smart. But I know I can only get to a certain level, and that's a problem to me because the chick that's the district manager is the one's making the good money. And to me, she shouldn't be because she doesn't like, okay, you went to school, you got a degree, whatever. So the one guy was like, have you ever thought about sales? Like your personality, you'll talk to frickin' anybody. And I'm like, I always thought of sales as car sales. And I always never liked the thought of like the grimy, slimy, disingenuine. I'm like, that's not my style. I'm like an open book. People can read me. Like if I'm not a fan of somebody, you can usually tell on my face. It's very difficult for me to hide. And he's just like, no, I used to work there. I know the manager still. Like, I think they're looking for a salesman. You know, you should look into it. And I'm like, okay. So I did, and I went in for an interview, and I can't remember if I was hired on the spot or if they called me back. I think I was hired on the spot because I went and smoked a bowl with Danny right after and was like, I got the job. Small world, right? And I've been working there ever since. And I mean, like, and that's the thing that's kind of, it's been difficult for me, but I'm slowly like, I'm not proud of the way I got the job, but
Wait, what part? I was expecting a terrible story. What part? You went and interviewed and were hired?
Yeah, well, that's the detail that I don't really want to share.
Got it. So, okay, all right. But anyway, you were selected. And the craziest thing is, like, when you were describing, like, the sales aspect and stuff, you just think of what most shitty salesmen are. Mm-hmm. But really, a person that's an open book, that's super straightforward, that is willing to go all in for people, that wants to do things the right way, they're the ultimate salespeople. Mm-hmm. The shady little losers that are salespeople, low caliber people, they're never the ones that really are exceptional. I mean, there might be some cases of extreme narcissists or psychopaths that do really well in sales because they'll just lie and cheat and steal their way all the way to the top. I'm sure there's a lot of that in the corporate world, but a genuine person that's going to try to do things the right way, that understands efficiency, that is like, right and wrong focused, you're going to crush it because it's not the norm. The norm is the stereotype that came into your brain and said, like, I don't want to be like that. But it's like, if more people with your personality trait pursued sales, sales is one of the number one ways to become successful in this society beyond any doubt, because every product or service needs to be sold. People have to want to use the product or service. You need a conduit through which the company can speak to its customers and feel the value has to be felt. That's what the salesman is.
Yeah, and the biggest part, like for somebody with a personality like me, is the harder you work, the more money you make. And there's not a lot of jobs that are like that. And that's what was enticing to me, because I didn't care about coming in on my day off. I didn't care about, like, I will do whatever I have to do to make the money. And that's what a lot of people, I think, don't get when they just go to college, because they're like, well, I got this degree, so I need to be getting paid this higher level. It's like, you don't know shit. Like, actually being in the workforce is how you learn. But
plus they want the comfort of a salary, or just, if I trade this many hours, I make this much money. They prefer that. And to me, that is a literal nightmare. I couldn't do it. Like, I remember I was a porter at a dealership initially, and that's my only hourly job I've ever had my whole life. After that, I went into a job that was commission based, just like you, and now I do this. Listen, what would incentivize me to do any more if no matter what I do, I'm going to get the same amount? That's going to kill my ambition. That's going to kill my drive. The only thing that would maintain a decent level would be just the fact that I take pride in my work. But beyond that, I'm not going to do much beyond it. But sales is like, hey, remember that ceiling you were terrified of? Remember that cap that you saw on your other manager's head? That's not there. You can go as big as you want to go. And if you can really become a high-end salesperson that, like, imagine you get hired by like a Fortune 500 company, you'll make more money than people could imagine in their wildest dreams. And it's really just people skills and your skills, your discipline, focus, attention, things like that. But that's not something you get on a piece of paper. That's something you develop through life.
And it takes time to figure out kind of your groove, like get into your own way of doing it. And that's what, when I first started, it was pretty challenging because, so I was 20 when I started, and
how old are you now? We've never even said that.
25.
You're 25 now.
20 when I started, and I was turning 21 that year. And I was working around, like every other salesman was, I think the closest in age was like 26 or 27, but he was like one of the worst ones in the department, just like didn't really care. And then there was a guy like in his 40s, and then there was a guy like in his 60s, and a girl that was in her 60s. And so the challenge when I first started was, I mean, it's human nature. People are going to judge. They're going to look at somebody that's older and be like, well, they know more because they're older, they're wiser, whatever. So when I first started, I wasn't as big of a fan of it because I was just like, man, how am I ever going to make it? Especially because the two older people had been there a while. The older guy was a raging alcoholic, and he took what we call a few sabbaticals because he went to jail for drinking and driving. But I think that actually helped me get ahead. And he was funny. I've always gotten along with people older than me because, like, am who I am. And so, like, I would just, I would learn from him, and because everybody had their own way. Like, he didn't care if it was a $20 sale. He was going to sell the shit out of it. Where the older woman was like, oh, are they not driving a Mercedes? She, like, pick up the phone, act like she had a phone call. Like, but it was just a different mentality. And, like, it worked both of them were successful. I mean, the guy, his name was Chuck. He was ruthless, man. He broke, until I got in the department, like, every record that there was. And, so, and then there was, the other, like, middle-aged guy that definitely seemed, kind of had his, like, car salesman type mentality. But I would take bits and pieces from everybody. And then it wasn't until the pandemic hit that pretty much the way it worked, so they didn't want to bring Chuck back because he had taken 2 sabbaticals, and they're like, bro, we don't want to. everybody loved him, like customer wise, but it was just more of a liability at that point. And they used the pandemic as a way to like sift out the bad people, which I thought was smart. So he wasn't going to come back. There was a guy that was just training in sales previous to the pandemic hitting, and they didn't want to bring him back. The one middle-aged guy had switched departments within the same company, so he was already out of the department. And then the older woman was worried about her health. Like she was, because, so they closed, I think, at the beginning of March, and it was only like a month, which was, I was going crazy. Like, I would never be able to not work. I don't know how there were people that didn't work for a year and just collected unemployment and were happy as
Danny.
It's such a Danny.
Shout out to Danny. And he
Just
was
game all the
happy
time.
as he lived in Norath for the World of Warcraft. He lived there. He was in another realm and happier than could be. I mean, like, probably smile ear to ear, but like, yeah, I couldn't do it either.
Yeah, no, that's definitely does not surprise me. But so it worked to my advantage because so there was at the time the main manager and assistant manager, and then they wanted to bring back one of the salesmen, and I was like, I'm ready to come back because there was pretty much nobody else because the other younger guy had gotten fired, and so I came back, and initially it was really weird. Like for a week we were doing curbside sales. Curbside flooring sales. That's great. Like it was so weird. And then we started like picking up and we could have people in, but there was just different restrictions. We had to sanitize a bunch of stuff. And we had another guy that was working in the warehouse, was actually the owner's son, that was going to move to sales. So he's like brand new and was jumping in. And so literally out of commission base, because the managers were salary, there were 2 of us. And it was one of the most exhausting times of my life, but I was making bank. And I didn't even, like, it was a little difficult because, like, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, my gosh, I didn't send that email. Like, I need to follow up with Joe Schmo. I told him I was going to call him, and I never called him. So that was a little difficult because it was, like, a lot of clients. But it was, I mean, the amount of numbers I was able to hit was crazy. And then I feel like that also built my clientele to what it still is now. Like, I've had people that they'll come back and like, oh yeah, you helped me 2 years ago, 3 years ago, which is where I have an advantage over a lot of all the other salesmen are very new because the other guy ended up leaving, going back to work in the warehouse. I'm trying to think of who else. We had a lot of people like kind of come and go. The older lady eventually came back, but then she retired because she turned 70. So not necessarily like bad things, just some people didn't work out for them or whatever, and I just stuck it out. Well, then it ended up the assistant manager, it was crazy. He got the job because he was working in the warehouse and he did really good in the warehouse. And so somebody that worked in the warehouse as well that was higher up recommended him for that job. And he hated people. He hated talking to people. It was like a super weird situation because whenever we needed his help, we were like, hey, we're overflowing in here. Can you help out? He would like get so mad. He'd be like, I hate this place, blah, 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 blah. Like he was just so angry to have to talk to people. And I'm like, but yet, this job was the first time he was able, like he bought a new car. He was able to move out of his parents' house. And he was older than I was, like only a couple years. And I like never understood. I'm like, dude, it's not that. And he would almost like get irritated with how good I was at, because I was just myself. I had like customers that when I got my first apartment, they like had me come over to their house and get like plates and stuff that they were getting rid of because I would just have a conversation with them. Like that's sales. When you want something from people, people can tell and you're disingenuine. When you just want to have a relationship with them, get to know them, and then help them with a problem that they're having and try to help them find a solution, then you're doing it right. And that's what I told him is I was like, and the reason that I started talking to this lady was because of the shirt she was wearing. It was like my grandparents had used to live where the shirt was she was from. And then we got to talking and she was like, if you're ever up there, you call me, you come to my property, whatever. And it would like kind of drive him crazy. But so anyway, he ended up, we could tell like at the beginning of the year, he was just using a lot of personal days right off the rip, like coming in late. Like he would just sit in his office and watch YouTube all day, never do anything. And that like, it went on for a while. And finally he put his, it was actually presented to him because of like the structure of the company. So this company does every auto show in the country. So when the pandemic hit, and the auto show is like 95% of their business, 90%. It's a big portion. So that was a huge hit. Like, we in retail were the only people bringing in money. So everybody that was working normally in the auto show and trade show division, they were like trying to find a job. Like, they had certain guys like deep cleaning the warehouse, like filling potholes in the parking lot. Like, they were just trying to, because they were getting money to pay people. So they were trying to find work for them to do. We had one of the guys that normally worked in the trade show division was like in sales for a little bit. One of the girls was like a receptionist. So it was like a very weird, but that's how I met Betsy, because we had worked within the same company, but we never worked like alongside each other. And because there was nothing going on in trade shows, she became receptionist. And then we were like two peas in a pod. She's like, I like this girl, even though big age gap. But yeah, so that is what really allowed me to, because then I saw the potentials. I'm like, oh, I can make great money here. And so I just stuck it out and worked as hard. I mean, for probably years, I was going in on my day off every day. And it would always be like, oh, I just got to follow up, do this measure, follow up with this client. And then I'd be there for half the freaking day. I mean, I did it to myself. It was fine. It was also nice after the pandemic, we switched our hours. It used to be 10 to 8, Monday through Saturday, and Sundays were noon to 5. And you got one day off a week, and you worked every other Sunday. And then initially when I first started, it was the day before your day off, you could leave at 5 o'clock, and the day after your day off, you could come in at 1. And you know me, I was like, how can anybody have a life like this? And the older lady, when I started working there, had 2 days off, and then her every other Sunday. And so I was talking to the boss. I'm like, this is like, I'm about to turn 21. I'm working 10 to 8. And like and he's like, well, it's technically almost 2 days off because you get to leave early and come in late. I'm like, no, it's not. So he's like, if you can write a schedule that it works for everybody to have 2 days off, then do it. And I'm like, roger that. So I wrote a schedule so that everybody could have 2 days off, and it worked. So that gave us a little bit more freedom. But then after the pandemic, just because of staffing reasons, they couldn't cover those hours. So they closed on Sundays, and then they made it open 9 to 6, which is what they're still at. And it's so much better because nobody was coming to shop for flooring at 7 o'clock. I was watching Netflix on my phone. I was like, and being commission based, like, this sucks because I'm not making any money when people aren't coming in. So I was grateful for that, and my ability to then, like, I pretty much was highest seniority wise in sales aside from the manager. And so then I was already pretty much doing what the assistant manager would do, just because the main manager needed help in certain aspects. And he had to have somebody that if he took a day off, they had the same ability of calling a mill or reaching out to somebody to do something rather than bothering him. Like, he could never take a vacation if he didn't have somebody to backfill his job. So I would always, like, my way of running because it was kind of it's still my own little business. I was just very, like, every day that I came in on Tuesday, I was like, alrighty, I'd have like 6 folders in front of me. I'd be like, I need you to check on this material. It was supposed to be here this Thursday, but I just want to make sure that that's still up to date. And then can you check on this? And I think finally he was like, you can have access to this because I'm sick of you sitting in my office and doing this. But I was just wanted to make sure everything was in line. So then it was my 24th birthday. He asked the owner, he's like, can she get like officially the assistant manager title, which was pretty weird. Like, it was crazy to me to be that age and be at that level that I was. And like, this company is a very traditional company that I'd say, like, don't get me wrong, they're open-minded, and like as the times go on, they've progressed, but like there weren't a lot of women in higher up positions. And so I never wanted to make a big deal about that, because I feel like that's the problem, is like, I was there because I worked hard. It doesn't matter of the gender or whatever. And that's what, like, my mom tried to argue with me one time about like equal pay. Big mistake. And she was saying how she's like, well, your sister, she's done the same job that a guy was doing before her, and she found out that he was making, I can't even remember the numbers, let's say $70,000 a year, and she's making 40 or 50, I don't even know. And that's just like, that just goes to show. And I'm like, and then same thing, like my other sister, she works at a hospital, and I was like, Mom, do you understand like the reasoning behind that? One, women choose jobs that are lower paying. Do you want to go work on an oil rig? No. Look at Papa's a firefighter. Do you see a lot of women? And it's not a matter of that would be a difficult job for a woman to do. I mean, the amount of stories my dad would tell me about having to go lift 400-pound people because they got a surgery and were sitting in a chair for 3 days straight, shitting and pissing themselves, and they needed 6 guys to lift them. Like, there's just a point of like, you're not at
Wait,
that.
are you saying that men overall are physically stronger than women, Emma? I feel like you're saying you're speaking the old language that is forbidden. You better be careful or you're going to get canceled real fast. No, 100%. I mean, and there's something else that you just said that is so incredibly powerful, but we can dig a little further is like you have to be a spokesperson for your own value in this life. If you are willing to be agreeable and just accept the terms that people are going to give you, you're going to get far less. Is that shocking to anyone? You understand your value or you have direction of what you are working towards and vision. So when someone tries to put their thumb on your head, if there's a reason that you can find that they're not allowed to do that, you're like, nope, sorry, I'm commission based. I can do this. Like when your manager said, if you can find a way to make this schedule work, you're like, Roger that. Well, then I'm going to make this work and I'm going to give it back to you. You have to be an advocate for yourself in this life. If a company can bring their bottom line down because people are willing to agree to longer hours for less pay, they're going to do it. So it's like you having less of a agreeable nature, you're more willing to fight for your value. Plus, you are also motivated by a higher paying job. You've always been motivated by, let me see the return for my hard work. You would not be satisfied just showing up somewhere, trading an exact amount of your time for a certain amount of pay. Some people might be happy with that. You're not. Overall, I think the statistics would clearly show that women do not advocate for themselves as well in corporate America, and they're probably drawn more to just careers that don't pay as much. Men are willing to take on extremely high, stressful, difficult jobs to protect and provide for themselves, their family, whatever it is, their legacy. Overall, women are probably like, you know what? I'd rather have both my weekend days off. I'd rather sleep in Saturday and Sunday or do things around the home or take care of my health or go out with my girlfriends. And a lot of men are more willing as a whole to sacrifice their own happiness in the short term for what benefits them more in the long run. You have a lot of masculine traits in that way. You know what I mean? And a lot of times people think, I think some of the, we're not going into this topic, but some of the kind of like gender confusion and stuff, women can be masculine and men can be feminine. It is about the traits that you take on and hold as valuable. If I don't hold being assertive as a valuable part of my consciousness and I let all that go, I'm going to become more feminine. If you don't learn how to be assertive and speak up for yourself and negotiate on your own behalf, you're not going to have some of the masculine characteristics that will make you more successful. Now, maybe in another utopian fantasy world, let's say the roles were completely switched and all the women are assertive and stuff, then we would just call those feminine traits. But in our current society and its structure, masculine traits are like the assertiveness, the fighting for yourself, the being more, or less agreeable. It's like that doesn't change your gender or anything like that. It's just these are qualities that you should look at and say like, why are these people getting that? And the reason I'm on this rant right now is your mom saying like, oh, the gender pay gap. It's the same feeling that I have. Like I saw it in your eyes. It's like you can dismantle that to anyone that wants to listen, but people don't want to listen. They want to feel validated like, yeah, it is the patriarchy. Like I know a couple people in this community that are like, yeah, fuck the patriarchy. That's the reason my life sucks. The reason that my young girl is not going to get ahead in this life is because of the evil men that suppress women. You're delusional. Let me say that again. You're delusional. The reason is maybe you have not trained your children or taught them how to take the power back into their life, how to speak for themselves, how to put their foot down, how to be out of environments that don't serve them, how to be their own advocates, about how to seek information that truly helps them grow. That is what is holding you back. It's not the evil oppressor right around the corner that's like just waiting to oppress your kid or you. It is you. And the worst part is when you adopt that type of thinking, you become your own oppressor.
Yeah.
you all of a sudden lock yourself in a jail cell and you're the victim and the guard. And it's like, and you are liberated from that, but it's rare. I said to, I was training Kate this morning, and I said, I actually have a podcast with Emma today. And she's like, oh, that's sick. And we were talking, and I said, something is incredibly fascinating about Emma. Like, I'm very intrigued by you because there are very few women that I know that are like you to your level. We have a lot of masculine women in this gym in the sense of like ideology, masculine traits. We like Zoe is a fucking powerhouse. Like we have multiple women in Fallon and I mean Ashley. These girls, you can't push them around. Male, female or not, like they'll fight you. They'll physically fight you. They will fight you with words. They will fight you from start to finish in every way. But that's not the norm. That's not, you are rare. Like when I was talking to you one day when we were sitting on the side of the mats, you had an injury in your shoulder. So I was talking to you about training and then we just got into somehow into like philosophical concepts. And I'm like, what in the world? And that's what made me go, I need to know this woman's story because in your story, there's clues. And in those clues, we can learn to train the generation of kids that are coming up and other young women how to be the powerful version of themselves while keeping it under control. Because again, your story had two routes that could have taken place. You could have become a tyrannical monster that refused to listen to anyone, that steamrolled anyone in your path, that could have had no emotional control, that could have been just a raging lunatic. Like at one point in your story, you said, I took pride in being a bitch. Some people live their entire lives taking pride in being a bitch. And it's like, or like, let's say for a man, like being an asshole, I feel extreme pity when I meet those people. I'm like, if you're in your 30s and you haven't found something in life that has inspired you and affected you deeply enough that you don't want to be an asshole, that you want to grow out of that and you want to see, like, suck the juice out of this life, I just pity you. Like, I'm sorry. That sucks, man, because you know what? Life on the other side of that is cool. You could have become that, Emma, but something has caused you to become this empowered young woman that is still battling her own demons. We spoke about some before the podcast, and you still have certain limitations in your brain like, yeah, well, why do I deserve this or that? Life's not fair. And if you can figure things out and you can create the blueprint to the greatest Emma that could possibly exist, you deserve to get it. There's no reason. There's nothing in your past that disqualifies you from being worthy to go to the next level. And you have a very kind heart behind everything. One day you were telling me a story about, I'm not going to put you on blast for who it is or what it is, but someone that you wanted to help in your life that doesn't want help. That doesn't, they could step up and be a much better version of what they're currently displaying. And you almost don't want to come down on them because it's like, but I care about them. I would like to be able to help. I want to see them on the other side of their struggles. And I had to look you in the face and be like, unfortunately, that's on them at a certain point. You can give to a certain degree, but if you don't start putting your foot down and you don't start being the person that you have to be for you, you are going to be self-sabotaging. You're going to be deluding yourself because of someone else that doesn't want to do the work. And that's bullshit, Emma, and you don't need to do that. You need to put your damn foot down and be the person that you should be. And that will create the right magnetism. It will pull the people to you that will be most impacted positively by you. And you will have the biggest difference, which is what you're looking to have anyway. So it's like you're going to almost battle a lot of these limitations because of you are becoming extremely empowered, but you have a good heart and you want to have sympathy for others. It's good to try to help people, but you can lead a horse to water. It's as simple as that. The next thing I want to say is it's 2:15. We have recorded an hour, let me get this right, an hour and 38 minutes of dialogue, and we are just at the pandemic. We got to do a part 2. So what I'll say is we'll conclude this here, and then I want to do a part 2 where we're going to talk a ton about the pandemic. We're going to talk about you getting to a leadership role, how that's changed you, like from the young fireball to now a position of authority, and you have responsibility, and you there's imposter syndrome that comes with that. There's all kind of things that come with that. And then you haven't even discussed your journey into martial arts. You haven't even discussed why you came into SFS, why you started training, the battles that you're dealing with in there, how you. There's a part two, and it's going to be incredible. And honestly, this podcast was the magic again. The last 5 podcasts, honestly, a lot of it was my setup. And then having a setup that I was so disappointed with led to me feeling so poorly about them. But this felt like at my best again. You know what I mean? If we would have recorded the dialogue before this podcast, that shit was fire. That would go viral. But anyway, with that being said, we'll wrap it up here. We know where to start from last time. So when we sit back down, I'm going to say, Emma, we're at the pandemic. Let's continue the story. It was a pleasure to sit with you today. It's great to really learn about what makes you you. And like, I'm constantly learning in this life, and I'm trying to take clues from every single person I meet that has got themselves in order. And honestly, the people that don't have themselves in order, because it's giving me a clearer picture about what it takes to help people become their best and what really produces greatness versus what just makes you feel the way you want to feel. So, I hope you enjoyed the dialogue today, and we'll wrap this up.